Moving forward to our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Joonhee. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Joonhee is a Chief Executive Officer and the founder of Knowledge AI Incorporation. He has done his MBA from Harvard Business School and BA with distinction and a college scholar in government and economics from Cornell University. Ladies and gentlemen, he strongly believes that education should evolve from the current classroom structure to more individualized learning. His passion of education came along with his experience as an executive chairman at Times Education, one of the largest Korea-based private education institute. Let's go ahead and welcome Joonhee on board.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It's been more than a year since the COVID breakout, and I still cannot get used to time differences in virtual conferences. My name is Joonhee Won, and unlike many distinguished speakers on this conference, I'm not an academic. I'm an education practitioner. Initially, my speech was about why our education system doesn't work. But then I thought about it and decided that all of you already know what's wrong with our education system. So my speech is about how to change the way we teach and the way we learn. Most of us dislike education. Our current education system of schools was devised in the 19th century, and it was designed to teach minimum knowledge and literacy to the public. It is no longer relevant for the modern age. In particular, learning by rote memorization and the use of standardized tests for judging performances are outdated and ineffective. Bertrand Russell said it the best. Education has become one of the chief obstacles to intelligence and freedom of thought. Even the geniuses in history and some of the most accomplished people failed in schools. Einstein, Churchill, Darwin, and Thomas Edison, just to name a few. There is very low correlation between academic grades and success. In fact, there is a joke. A students get hired to teach at the universities. Bs get relatively good jobs working for the Cs. Academic grades rarely assess qualities like creativity, leadership, and teamwork skills. Jack Ma, who failed 2 elementary exams, 3 middle school exams, 3 college entrance exams, founded Alibaba, and is now one of the richest men in the world. According to him, the secret of success is never giving up. Not a Harvard degree, probably because he applied to Harvard 10 times and never got in. Let me illustrate what's wrong with our education system with a personal example. My father was a diplomat. As a result, my childhood education was literally all over the place. I started my schooling in Korea. Back then, Korean teachers thought physical punishment was a good thing. This is me when I was in the 3rd grade. Those of you perceptive people might have noticed that it is a black and white photo. Yes, it was 100 years ago. My 3rd grade teacher told us to memorize the entire multiplication table. I thought it was a dumb idea since a very large multiplication table was posted on the wall. I expressed my opinion and I got a whack on my butt for speaking out. I was so happy when my father was sent to Sierra Leone on a diplomatic mission. Sierra Leone is a small country in West Africa. Little did I know that Sierra Leone was a former British colony, and when I enrolled in a school there, the teachers practiced the teachings of John Locke, spare the rod, spoil the child. I experienced it all, Korean, British, American, even European school systems. From experience and with some authority, I can tell you, all education systems are basically the same, except for the language of instruction. Hence, we are equally screwed. Going back to my 3rd grade example, instead of memorizing, I wish I had a teacher who taught me the following. Write down a multiplication table for 9. With single digits, start with a 9 and go down by 1. Tens digits, start with a 0 and go up by 1. It could also be thought of as 10 minus 1, 20 minus 2, 30 minus 3, etc. 9 multiplied by 2 is the same as 9 plus 9 or 20 minus 2. Instead of merely memorizing numbers, such lesson gives meaning to the numbers. This is teaching understanding. This process teaches thinking skills as well as logic and number sense. Not only math, all subjects should be taught this way. Ineffectiveness of education is a global phenomenon. UNESCO published a study claiming that the students are failing in schools. Out of 1.2 billion students enrolled globally, about half, or 600 million students, are failing. The situation is further exacerbated by the fact that there is a severe teacher shortage. Currently, there are 50 million teachers. UNESCO estimates that we need 69 million more teachers by 2030. Unless we pay our teachers like rappers and Hollywood superstars, we're not going to get 69 million more teachers in 10 years. What is wrong with our current education system? Simply put, it is an antiquated system we inherited from the Industrial Revolution days that try to create identical people. Back then, it was an easy way to teach basic literacy and simple arithmetic. But the world has changed. Student demographics is no longer homogeneous. Every student is different, and every student has different abilities. Professor Howard Gardner of Harvard University says there are multiple intelligences, not just IQ. Taking the concept further, Harvard professor Clayton Christensen published a book called Disrupting Class. He says that the essence of education disruption is the student-centered learning. Unfortunately, Professor Christensen was not clear on how and what technology will bring such disruption to education. He used such innocuous terms as computer-based learning or newer technology. But the world is now ready for such disruption. And the newer technology is called artificial intelligence. Before we talk about the application of AI, we must first understand our brains from the neuroscience and physiological perspective. Learning and remembering are not natural functions of our brain. Let's look at our DNA by looking at the language acquisition graph. We are all born geniuses until about 7 years of age when our ability starts to decline. Funny that the age coincides with when we start school.
Recording in progress.
To bypass the Ebbinghaus's curve. We know that if we do something called spaced repetition, we can remember longer and perhaps encode it into our long-term memory. The ideal repetition time is after 1 day, after 3 days, and after 6 days. This process requires enormous patience and determination, since repetition is tiring and boring. And this requires very strong commitment of time, which makes education very inefficient. This is why Asian students do well in schools. They have tiger moms. There are also other ways to extend their learning retention rate. It is called the active recall. This learning pyramid illustrates various passive learning to active learning techniques to improve retention rate. For example, simple listening to a lecture has only 5% retention rate, while a group discussion yields 50% retention rate. This is why Harvard Business School uses case studies and class discussions instead of...
Hi, I was told that you have no sound, so I'm going to restart. Looks like we have some technical difficulties. Ajish? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
They say that forgetting is God's gift to humans. However, it is a curse to students. According to Ebbinghaus, we forget 42% of what we learned within 20 minutes, 56% after 1 hour, and forget 67% within a day. How can we educate students when the moment students leave the classroom, they can only remember 44% of what they just learned? Researchers in neuroscience have made advances in how to bypass the Ebbinghaus's curve. We know that if we do something called spaced repetition, we can remember longer.
I did. I am
The
sharing.
ideal repetition time is after 1 day, after
I
3
think
days,
it's your.
after 6 days. This process requires enormous patience and determination.
Can you see? Can you hear?
Tiring and boring. And this requires very strong commitment
Hello?
of time, which makes education very inefficient. This is why Asian students do well in schools. They have
Okay.
They say that forgetting is God's gift to humans. However, it is a curse to students. According to Ebbinghaus, we forget 42% of what we learned within 20 minutes, 56% after 1 hour, and forget 67% within a day. How can we educate students when the moment students leave the classroom, they can only remember 44% of what they just learned? Researchers in neuroscience have made advances in how to bypass the Ebbinghaus's curve. We know that if we do something called spaced repetition, we can remember longer and perhaps encode it into our long-term memory. The ideal repetition time is after 1 day, after 3 days, and after 6 days. This process requires enormous patience and determination, since repetition is tiring and boring. And this requires very strong commitment of time, which makes education very inefficient. This is why Asian students do well in schools. They have tiger moms. There are also other ways to extend their learning retention rate. It is called the active recall. This learning pyramid illustrates various passive learning to active learning techniques to improve retention rate. For example, simple listening to a lecture has only 5% retention rate, while a group discussion yields 50% retention rate. This is why Harvard Business School uses case studies and class discussions instead of lectures. After this presentation, you're going to remember only 5% of what I said today. If you want to remember more, please have a discussion amongst yourselves or try to teach others. That is how you do active recall. Let's take a break now, since it's been about 10 minutes since my speech began. MIT professor Sanjay Sarma claims that human attention span is 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, our mind enters into a wandering state. To help you refocus, I'm going to give you a quiz. Don't worry, you will not be graded. Question number 1. If you have only 1 hour to study for an exam, how would you spend the time? A, reading study materials, or B, taking tests? Interestingly, most students choose option A. Question number 2, when choosing a course, would you choose a course that is 3 hours long once a week or 3 one-hour lessons? Question number 3, you have 1 day until the day of the exam. You are cramming for an exam and there are a lot of materials to cover. Is it more efficient to study continuously or take frequent breaks? Question number 4, which is more efficient, studying one subject at a time or studying multiple subjects simultaneously? By now, you should know the answers are B's in all of these questions. Why? Spaced repetition and active recall. Our brain is a muscle too. Just like you train your body with an interval training, our brain learns better with an interval training. Like physical exercises, brain can be trained better with strenuous exercises. In education, it is called the effortful learning. There are techniques like the Pomodoro technique, which enhances focus, reduces anxiety, and boosts motivation. No, the Pomodoro is not related to the tomato sauce and spaghettis. It is a memory encoding strategy that forces concentration and better use of time. First, you break your studying into an interval of 25 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break. 1 unit of 25-minute studying time is called a Pomodoro, and you are supposed to take a break for 20 minutes after 4 Pomodoros. This technique increases productivity because it is designed according to our brain encoding processes. These are important tips for students. It may be too late for you, but please tell it to your children. Everything I said until now points to a new paradigm of learning. The answer is individualized learning. Benjamin Bloom did a seminal study in 1984 comparing the effectiveness of 3 modalities of teaching. 1, conventional classroom, 2, mastery learning, and 3, one-on-one tutoring. He found out that there is a 2 sigma difference between classroom instruction versus individualized tutoring. What this means is that if you look at the average test score of students for conventional classroom versus individual tutoring, individually taught students receive much higher score than classroom taught students. The study clearly shows the superiority of one-on-one tutoring. But how can we change our current 20 to 30 students per class to a one-on-one lesson, especially when there is a global teacher shortage? Bloom suggests an intermediate solution. It is called the mastery learning. Mastery learning students perform 84% better than conventional class students. To do mastery learning, we need a smaller class size. We also need a lot of dedicated teachers who will spend hours grading exams and preparing new tests for students. Considering the salaries we pay to our teachers, we're not going to find too many teachers who are willing to do this. But we can achieve mastery learning with an automated software platform. What is a mastery learning? It simply means that students have to master the topic before moving on to the next topic. We know that active learning is better than passive learning. Therefore, with mastery learning, we use formative assessment, which is a fancy term for a test. Students hate taking tests. However, test taking is a form of active recall. Students who test their understanding will find out what they know and what they do not know. This process is called metacognition. After a test, it is important to provide an immediate feedback, at the latest within 1 day of the test. We can do the mastery learning through an automated computer system. This way, we do not leave any child behind. No student moves on to the next topic without understanding the topic before. Education concepts are made of building blocks. Each student has different building blocks that are missing. Therefore, we have to find the zone of proximal development, which is a term for finding appropriate level of difficulty for each student. Combined with the historical learning data of the student, an AI algorithm can accurately diagnose and recommend an appropriate study path for each student. One last point of differentiation in our approach comes from the use of time dimensions. Currently, we make all students learn at the same speed. For example, we make our 7th graders take Algebra 1 over a semester. Did you ever wonder why we teach students one subject over one semester? Some students need only 1 month, and some may need 6 months. Why are we teaching students to learn at the same pace? Shouldn't we change our curriculum in order to manipulate time to fit the student needs rather than the school's needs? How can we allow students to spend more time on one subject and less on others, depending on their abilities? The answer again is an AI-assisted self-learning platform. Speed of learning should be based on the individual need. Difficulty should be based on students' ability. This is not a novel idea. Throughout the human history, tutoring was the main modus operandi for education. Alexander the Great was taught by Aristotle. British nobility had private tutors who lived with them to teach their children. Education is no longer the privilege of the rich and the few. It must be for everyone. Good quality education should be available for everyone, even if their parents cannot afford a good human teacher. Technology is a great equalizer. With technology, we can change our schools and teachers. Many have tried to change education and failed. They failed because they tried to change the fundamental structure of the education. This is not what I'm advocating. I believe the change to the education should be gradual and evolutionary, not a radical revolution. We have to respect the tradition of teaching, which is fully ingrained into our schools and teachers for centuries. So we have to change everything without changing anything. Education is so central to our lives, and yet we agonize about the quality of education, especially because it affects the lives of our children. We must change education to make it more relevant for the future. Ken Robinson advocated teaching creativity. Einstein said curiosity. I'm calling for efficiency in education. With the help of AI, individualization can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, making education efficient and personalizing content to fit the child. We can leave learning basic knowledge to AI software platform, and human teachers can teach creativity, intellectual curiosity, and everything else we did not have the time for. That is how we can make education effective and efficient and modernize education for the future. Thank you for listening.
Okay, it looks like can you hear me? I have a question. The question is, would the future of education be more expensive when it comes to personalized learning? I really don't think so. In fact, the computer software is actually cheaper than human teachers, and it can help 100,000, 200,000, or 1,000,000 teachers. So no, I don't think it would be more expensive. Okay. Let me see if there's any other questions. What are the current challenges, faced by educational system in terms of switching between technology and upgrading? These days, everything is on cloud. So the upgrades and everything will be done automatically. So I don't think there are any technical challenges there. Okay. Then maybe next one. I think that's it.
It was a pleasure having you on our platform. Thank you for coming and sharing insights. I'm sure everybody is delighted to have you on board and to listen to your session. Thank you so much once again.